Hi, I'm Mike Glenn, and I'm the president of the Engaged Church Network, and we welcome you to our podcast. And how about the new set for the podcast? All of our new digs, and we're grateful for the Lasting Media team and all they have done to upgrade our facility and our spot here to do this podcast. And so this is the first time, and we'd love to know what you think about it. So let us know at engagedchurchnetwork.com. Today, our guest is a friend of mine, Ben Anderson. Ben is the pastor of Christ Church here in the greater Nashville area, grew up in Iowa, came here like a lot of people in Nashville with guitar in hand.
That's right.
Ended up at Trevecca and got his MDiv from Vanderbilt, all while being here and all while being part of Christ Church. And including a stint as a member of the staff there for a while. Mm-hmm. And what makes Ben's story interesting is he is a child of Christ Church, served on staff previously to Christ Church, and has a few years ago been asked to come back and pastor that church. Mm-hmm. Now, Ben, the running gag among ministers is you can't pastor in your hometown.
Right.
You can't pastor where you grew up. There's a reason all of us leave.
Sure.
The places we grew up. I can't pastor a church in Huntsville. There are too many people there who knew me when I was a kid and everything else. But you felt the unique calling to come back to a church that had loved you in a significant time in your life, been part of major milestones of your life, and now was open to this whole transition of new people moving in the area and that every church in Nashville is facing.
Right.
So I thought it'd be fun for us to talk about what is it like to come home?
Yeah.
And what kind of things were you thinking about as they were asking you to come back? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then what have you found out was true about what you were assuming, and what kind of things have surprised you?
Yeah. Well, maybe the place to start would be, you'll hear stories from pastors that they were called to ministry when they were 12.
Right,
and they knew that, and my story is the opposite of that. I believed I was, music was my life, and that's what I was supposed to do and going to do. And so, when Erin, my wife, and I got married in 2000, we were living in Nashville. Christ Church is where we found ourselves and believed that's where we were supposed to be as a newly married couple. She was in graduate school at MTSU. I was playing music and on the road most of the time, and so I had no idea that vocational ministry, as we call it, would be in my future. That was not on my radar. It was not my agenda at all. But what happened at Christ Church were relationships that God brought into our purview, and relationships that were formed started to feed us. And so, long story short,
significant relationships with pastors and associate pastors.
Yeah, for sure. Because when music became something that was very much revealed to be an idol in my own life, and I went through a real crisis, not of faith, but a crisis of identity. Who am I, and what am I supposed to be doing?
Right.
And
if I don't have a guitar, then who am I? Right.
Yeah, and I didn't recognize at first what it was as God calling me into a very different, not only way of life, but a whole different career, all of it. And it was people that were part of Christ Church that helped me navigate that saw that, and were able to see God's call on my life before I did, honestly. And they weren't pushy and didn't try to tell me, this is what you're supposed to be doing with your life, Ben, as a 20-something kid as I was at the time. But they asked questions, and they encouraged me, and they were there for me and for Erin, and even when she and I were going through some of the rockiest times of our young marriage, there were elders in that church, and I say that as not just recognized elders, but just older saints of God who loved us and encouraged us and were there for us and with us. And so eventually, when I would come off the road and would answer God's call to lead the music industry and become much more dedicated to what it was mean to serve the church. I had no idea what that meant. I could drive a bus, so I could drive a shuttle bus for Christ Church. I was doing whatever they needed me to do. One of the first things I got asked to do was serve with junior high boys in their ministry at that point.
Yeah, if you can survive junior high boys, you can do ministry.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, I loved the outdoors. I loved all these kinds of things. They're like, hey, we need a guy like you to help with these young men and these kids. And so I just started saying yes to almost everything I could. And we didn't have any kids yet. Our first was going to be on the way shortly after this. But it was a situation where I just got involved. I got plugged in. And what would happen is people would start to recognize, again, gifts in me that I didn't know were there.
Right.
A call in my life that I didn't know was there yet. And because of the relationships that God brought into my life and the life of my wife and I, it was the saints of God who helped me see things in a perspective that I couldn't have seen on my own.
Yeah. My experience was very much the same.
Yeah.
The church around me knew before I knew.
That's right. And so, it got to the point where, my undergraduate degree was in biology, pre-med. I'm an Iowa farm kid that's good at fronting a bar band. And I'm like, so when the church came to me and said, "Man, we've got an opening in our children's ministry. We really think you should consider this." I was like, why wouldn't I be the perfect? I'm like, what are you thinking? Why would you?
Everything in my life has prepared me for this moment.
Yeah. So by that time, my wife was part of the faculty at Trevecca, Nazarene University here in town, and at that time, as the spouse of a faculty member, I could go earn a master's degree tuition free. And I said, well, that's a no-brainer. And the church supported me in that. They said, yep, when you've got to go as part of that cohort at the beginning of the semester, end of the semester, go do it. We're going to support you. Pastor Dan Scott, senior pastor at that time, was my biggest supporter. Said, yeah, absolutely, you need to go do this, and we're going to be behind you every step of the way. So I did. I went and did an MA in biblical studies and kept working full-time in children's ministry. And this was about 2008 or so. That's when God just started to really explode in my own heart what this call was and what that could be.
In the process of your studies?
In my studies, and then how does this actually apply? Because I had the blessing of, at that time, I'm going to school, full-time as a grad student, and I'm in ministry full-time.
Right.
And I'm a young dad and husband. And so with all of that, I'm not only learning in a capacity I never had before in terms of whether it's theology or biblical studies or pastoral care and all of these things, but I'm getting a chance to put it into practice.
Yeah, you field testing it pretty quick.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether that's in teaching or whether that's in walking through something with somebody on my children's ministry team, going through hard things in life. And so it was just as a student going back to school, as an adult, I appreciated it so much more than I did when I was 18. And what am I actually learning and why versus you just go to college because that's what you're supposed to do when you graduate high school. And so for me, it was, and what I'm trying to say is Christ Church, they supported me 100% in that and just was so excited that I was able to benefit from that, grow in that. And it really was a place and more importantly, a people who supported, okay, here's what we see God calling Ben to. How do we support him and his family in this?
Okay. Yeah. And then they sent you out.
Yeah. So it was a case where it sent me out maybe unintentionally, you might say.
Churches do some of their best work.
Well, there was exactly. God has a way of working those things for our good, right? But there was a time where there was some staff restructuring, and I was part of a team that got cut down and reduced in size, and there was no animosity there. We knew it was coming, and again, mentors there, including the senior pastor Dan Scott at that time, who were 100% behind me, and I saw that as a time where maybe God's going to let me do something else for a while, and this is before the online revolution in education.
Right.
So I said, I want to finish my MDiv. How do I do that? I had 2 young kids at the time. My wife's working full time. Wasn't going to move to Duke or Fuller or anywhere like that. And said, how do we do that here in Nashville? Well, we got Vanderbilt, and ended up was able to earn a scholarship to Vandy, and said, okay, if I do this 2 years, and so my wife and I, we cut everything out of the household budget we possibly could, and just everything we could cut back, we did. Everything we could eliminate, we did. Yeah. Selling stuff and just going. I mean, literally going on faith, saying, "Okay, God, if you're going to make this happen," and I'm telling you, Mike, it was. We didn't. There was no GoFundMe then.
Yeah, right.
There was no like, "Hey, you want to support me?" I mean, we could have sent the letters, old school missionary style, but we didn't do that. But I'll tell you what, there were people from Christ Church who just started sending checks. And I'd go to the mailbox, and every 2 months, every 3 months, there'd be enough there. And whatever we were short that month, I mean, sure enough, here it is there. And after, somebody would do that 2 or 3 times, and I would approach them, oftentimes, because we were still going as a part of Christ Church in that community. And I would go and talk to them about this. And I had more than one person say, you know what, God God told us we're supposed to support you in this time. And whatever God's doing now and what God wants to do in the future, we're a part of it in this way now.
We want to invest in it now.
Yeah. And so Aaron and I were so blessed. We were so humbled. And what that did for our faith, what that did for us to trust in, okay, what God is doing now and what that means for God's purposes in and through our lives in the future, as not having any idea where that would go. Because I thought maybe I was going to head into academia. I really enjoyed that aspect. I thought maybe I'll go on and do a doctorate and go somewhere in that field. Yeah, I didn't know if I'd be in a local pastoral setting. I'd never served as a senior pastor at that point before. And so when it came to being both hands wide open, saying, God, you do what you want to do. But what he was doing was building faith in us to trust him, and he was doing it through his people.
Yeah, building that trust of the consistency of his faithfulness.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's right. You can talk about that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
But until you're praying on your way to the mailbox,
right? Oh, yeah.
Few of us understand what this means.
Exactly. To know what it is for him to provide, and it's not that God is stingy, but what it does for God, like you said, I mean, to provide just enough, right? What we need, and knowing that he's going to be faithful to do that.
Yeah,
man, what that does.
The alignment between what we needed, and what he provided.
That's right.
That was what got me.
Yeah,
was how these things consistently.
That's right. How clear that is. Right.
Yeah. We're the same. Here's what I need.
That's right.
And here's what we got.
Exactly. Which removes any doubt that God isn't doing this. Right. And so when we experienced that, and so what that would lead to was finished at Vanderbilt. I had a dear friend of mine that I had served in ministry with at Christ Church before. He was part of a church plant in Smyrna, and he was coming after me saying, Ben, I want you to come be my executive pastor. That's like the one role in the church I didn't want.
Yeah.
It was one of those things where
nothing in your life has prepared you to do the dirty work of a local congregation.
Right. It's right. It's like I think I can do this, but that doesn't mean I want to do this, right? And so I was applying for other positions, and it was just something where, okay, God, what do you want me to do, and what do you have for my family in this time? And so enough time had gone by, and enough doors had either closed or stayed closed, that I just got to the point where I said, okay, God, it has to be what you want to do. And so my good friend Scott Horde, again, he was pastoring at Christ Life in Smyrna at the time. He came to me and said, "Okay, we're ready, and we need you." And I knew if I could do it for anybody, it was him. I believed in the vision that church had, and him at the helm, and his gifts of evangelism and leadership. And I said, "Okay, God, if you're calling me to this, let's do this." And that turned into 5.5 years of a whole other kind of education that I didn't even know I needed. And yet God, in his grace and goodness, provided that, and it prepared me so much so in ways that I could never have anticipated. So that when Christ Church called me then in 2019 and said, Ben, we want to invite you into this discernment process. We think maybe you might be one of the candidates God's calling us to look at for the lead pastor position. To quote the great prophet Clark W. Griswold, if I'd have woken up with my head sewn to the carpet tomorrow, I would not have been more surprised. I just did not expect that at all. But I had learned by that point that my response to that initial phone call, because of the faith God had built in my wife and I said, can you give us a week to pray? And let me talk to Aaron, and we're going to pray about this. Can I call you back in a week, and we'll see what the Lord is saying? And so that's where we ended up. And so that led to a 6-month discernment process where I'd been on staff at Christ Church before for 4 years, had been there another 3 years, not on staff, but serving in a variety of capacities while I was in graduate school. So, like every church, I knew the strengths, I knew where weaknesses were. As we say, I mean, I'd been there long enough and deep enough to know how the sausage was made, and and as anybody does who's been in ministry, and any pastors with us today know exactly what that means. You see all the great things and the not so great things. And so I thought maybe in that process I was the candidate that they were looking at that had that kind of inside information and experience and could do that, to ask some of the questions that nobody else could about what is this next season going to be in the life of Christ Church. And
now for those who are outside of the Nashville experience, may not know that Christ Church in its history was at one point the church.
Sure.
The founder was the bishop to everybody.
Yeah. Pastor L.H. Hardwick.
Yeah,
He was amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
LH, I mean, everybody that's been in Brentwood.
Yes.
And when I came to Brentwood, anybody in Nashville has an LH story.
Right.
Where he called me, went out to lunch, we prayed, we did this, or,
absolutely.
or something like that.
Absolutely.
And now you are following.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, 75, almost.
Big shoes.
Oh, man. Well, and that's a job they tell you never to take.
Yeah.
Never take that position, right? After that guy. But it was a situation where, you got Christ Church that's almost 75 years old, has only had 3 senior pastors in its history, and I'm the third. And so you had, like I say, Pastor L.H. Hardwick, church was founded. He's 18 years old. It was family members that called him to preach, and what that became he was almost 65 years. He was in that capacity, and it's like you said, what the relationships he built, the influence that he had, who he was as a man of God and a true servant in the community of Greater Nashville. The impact is still resonating and will for a long, long time for all kinds of good reasons. So Pastor Dan Scott, who had been an associate pastor that Brother Hardwick had brought in for many years, he had been there in the 80s, was with a church in Phoenix for a while, came back in the early 2000s and served as a senior pastor for 10 years. And Dan was and still is a mentor to me. And so he was the one, I'll never forget the day, I'm working 20 hours a week in children's ministry, still trying to figure out what I'm going to do in my life in 2007. And he calls me into his office one day, and I'll never forget it. He looked at me, he says, "Ben, do you see the call on your life to pastor?" And I just looked right back at him and said, "No, I don't." And he said, "Well, I do. Yeah. I do." And it was just one of those, we all have those moments in our lives where everything before and then everything after, that's that fulcrum moment where things really change. And
people forget the importance of Eli's role.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
To tell Samuel, listen.
Yeah. Yep. I know who that is if you don't, right? And that's what it was. And so I'll always be thankful to Dan for that reason. It was great. And he helped me then. Putting me help when it came to mentorship, when it came to teaching and giving me opportunities to grow as the call to teach, the call to serve in those capacities.
Well, Dan has a reputation of being quite the academic.
He is. Brilliant scholar. Yes, absolutely. And, he easily could have served in the academic world and has in different capacities, but that call to pastor and mentor other pastors has also been on his life too.
So baby boy comes home.
Yeah. So at the end, again, it came down to me and my family, and so we got in there in July. It's almost 6 years now. It was July of 2019, about 6 months before COVID changed the world. And so I knew there'd be all kinds of growing pains. I knew as you've talked about many times on this podcast and other places, COVID changed the game, right, for everybody. And so no matter what any church was before or how it functioned, what the systems were in that church before, COVID shifted all of that. And especially, we're so aware of how that happened for us locally in the Middle Tennessee area, especially. So whatever growing pains you'd expect, with a new pastor and even coming back home, so to speak. And that has its benefits. People had trust in me. There were plenty of people that knew me from before. But in some ways, it'd been 10 years. I changed some things.
The other thing is you're still a boy to them.
Yes.
Because they take a picture of you
right.
and put it in their brain, but they don't let you grow up from that picture.
No. Yeah. Exactly. And so you're dealing with some of those things. And so then when it comes to here, what are the things that maybe God is asking us to change? What are the things that God's asking us to trust Him in and move toward for the future? One of the things that I knew coming back to Christ Church, but I've had to absolutely deal with and try to lovingly, pastorally deal with over the last 5.5 years. People don't fear change; they fear the loss.
Yeah,
that they're afraid that change is going to bring. And so, that idea of how do people get to a point where they can see or believe or trust that the change, the benefit, the goodness is going to outweigh the loss.
Yeah,
and I think one of the reasons God brought me back in this capacity is I think for some folks the familiarity and having been a Christ Church son, you might say, has helped with some of that.
Now let's again just for folks listening, it wasn't necessarily anything bad in your church's history that you had to change.
No.
I mean, this was a strong reputation.
Sure.
The worship ministry was literally world famous.
Right.
And people don't realize that on a lot of the old TV shows, if Dolly Parton were singing or somebody, that'd be the Christ Church choir backing them up.
That's right.
And but everything else has changed.
Everything else has changed.
And so what used to work, the language that used to work, is no longer as relevant.
Exactly.
So not only do you have to change, but you have to change something that in most people's mind was working.
Right. That's right. So when you see, and a good illustration of that for this is this example. So you'll still have a number of people who will show up on a Sunday morning because they've heard something about a particular, like you say, a music ministry or choir or whatever else, and they're interested in that. At Christ Church, we will see just as many, if not more people, who will show up on a Sunday morning after they've been a part of our recovery ministry for many, many weeks. Or they've been a part of somebody's small group in their home for 3 months. And finally accepted the invitation from somebody they've grown to trust and be like, okay, whatever these people are experiencing at that church.
The front door of the church has moved.
It has. It's now the front door of your house, right? It's the front door of that group where people are seeking real help with real problems in life. And so I think that's what has changed so much. I mean, COVID, people who, if they didn't know it before, they learned they can get so much information online anywhere they want, whether that's preaching, whether that's, consumption of great worship music, whatever it is, that's readily available in so many places to people. But now it's like, no, where do I find people who can in some way understand what I'm facing? And they know something about how this Jesus knows something about dealing with what I'm facing.
And who will love me in spite of everything.
So that was something, when I came back to Christ Church, I said the two areas of emphasis that I think God is really inviting us to lean into more than anything. It has to be intentional, relational discipleship, real relationships, and how God's calling us to grow in those and expand those to those around us. And it's local mission. How do we be the church in the community we're in?
Now, let's talk about the difference of what you just said there. When I was coming in to the ministry and I was being given what we would measure.
Sure.
You know, that may be an unofficial meeting or whatever, but you were told what you were going to be held accountable for. And one of them was attendance.
How many people are here?
And so the ability to relate to hundreds of people at the same time, or 500 people at the same time, 1,000 people, so that you develop this gift of being on the platform, but making it look like it's a conversation. The reality is now for the church and the church in the coming future, I believe, is going to be small groups, relationships, somebody I know and somebody who knows me.
That's it.
Now that has been a radical change. From the way I was held accountable to the success of my ministry.
And I think the reason for that is because the dynamics of trust have changed radically in the American church, right? Because the fact that you and I as pastors, 50 years ago, that would be a mark, well, we're trustworthy people.
Right.
In popular culture today, that makes us suspect. Right?
I tell people, when somebody says, be quiet, you're preaching. That's not a compliment.
No, exactly. And because of what we see almost on a weekly basis of scandal or, abuse or dishonesty in the church. And there's
you almost have to qualify yourself. Yes, I'm a pastor, but I'm not that kind of pastor.
Right, sure. So on the street today or in popular culture, there's as many people who are suspicious of churches and church leaders as they ever would be. That's where I should go for help, right? And so I think that's what's made the difference is even if you try to be as relatable and approachable and in how you preach, people really don't know, well, who is he off the platform? Who is he at home? Would his wife, if I asked her who he really is, right? Would his kids?
Well, I tell pastors I work with now that people watch how you treat your wife.
Yes. Yeah.
before they ever listen to a word you say.
Yeah, or they should.
Yeah,
right?
they do.
Exactly. And so I think that's the difference, like you said, with small groups is, and that's what we see this all the time with Christ Church is people, they invite their neighbors in, they invite other people from work, come over to our small group on Tuesday night.
Yeah.
Just come, it'll be great. And they get around a group of people, like you say, where they actually get to know, okay, these people, they're not just talking about this, they actually live this way. They actually do care about each other. They do help each other with their needs. They actually do pray for each other and see
And
God
when
move.
I tell them I got a big meeting Thursday, they'll call me on Thursday and ask me how it went, or
Exactly.
text me early in the morning going, praying for you today.
That's it. So many people today, and it's not just young people. I see this in seniors every day. So many people are asking the questions: Am I seen? Am I known?
Right.
Am I loved? Do I belong? Right. That's, in my opinion, that's not getting better. That's getting worse in our culture.
Right.
The conditions that lead people to doubt that. Right.
Oh yeah.
And so what people are genuinely looking for is can I be a part of something where I can begin to believe that I am seen, I am known, I am loved, I do belong, and not just this polished version of myself,
Right.
but for who I really am. And if I am brave enough to share my needs, my sins, my faults, my failures, my fears, will I still be accepted? Will these people still embrace me and come alongside with me? I believe the New Testament teaches us clearly that's who the church is supposed to be.
Yeah, and that's why AA is sometimes
Yes.
you were talking about the recovery ministry earlier. Sometimes the best churches around are AA meetings.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Yeah,
I tell people all the time. I mean, as we have heavily invested in recovery ministry. I mean, especially with human resources with Christ Church. The story of grace, in my opinion, is all of us as Christians should understand that we are in recovery.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what to be saved is to know I'm in recovery by the grace of God.
Everybody's an addict. Everybody's an addict. Everybody's dealing with something.
That's it. And we all need that.
So what has surprised you coming back?
What surprised me? A number of things. The things that I think I thought I was better equipped in than I was. The things where I had confidence that I don't anymore.
Yeah, we've learned humility, right? That's just
the things that I thought, surely if I just preach about this,
right? Yeah, it'll change them.
It'll change things.
Yeah, they'll see that. Yeah,
and that's not just in my leadership role or pastoral role. That's just if I can just be candid as a human being, it's true that we can't change anybody.
No.
I believe the gospel teaches us we really can't even change ourselves. We can partner with God.
Yes, right.
But it's got to be the Holy Spirit at work in us that's really going to bring any real and lasting change. And so that's something where, yes, humbled. What I've really learned is just time, right? And one of my greatest fears has always been I never want to be passive, but at the same time, I've learned you cannot push anything faster. You can't lead if people are not willing or able to follow at a pace that is healthy.
Well, and one of the things that we forget is that the Spirit has to do the work on the other side.
That's right. Yes.
And will not allow you to move until the Spirit's done the work that He needs to do there.
That's so good.
And
so true.
And we're like the first grader who keeps digging the butter bean up out of the milk carton.
How's this doing?
Yeah, and we wonder why it won't grow.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah.
So patience and the impact and the power of fear in people's lives.
Oh yeah.
How and I don't think people see that on the surface as readily for what it is. It's so easy for us to say, I trust God, I have faith, I believe, and yet we don't take Paul at his word. We don't pray about everything. We worry about everything and anything, right? And so the impact that can have on people, and again, fear of change because of fear of loss. I pastor a congregation where we have such diversity of generations, which is a blessing, but it's also a great challenge. I mean, many churches today, and pastors listening to this will know. I mean, we have plenty of churches where it's 40 and under, or it's
40 above.
40 and above, right? I think the most segregation we see is generationally in our climate today. Christ Church, we have generational diversity, but I tell people all the time, it takes hard work and a willingness to embrace that and reach across those generational divides, But the one thing everybody has in common, if they're honest, is there's something they're afraid of. And if we'll be honest about that and expect God to meet us in that across those, it's beautiful what we see God do.
When you see the family come together like that.
Yeah. And getting people to understand they really are a part of the body of Christ that is needed.
And you're responsible to it and responsible for it.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't think I can preach or teach or say over cups of coffee that enough that the body needs you.
Yeah.
And you need the body.
Well, I tell senior adults all the time, I know your grandchildren live in another state and that frustrates you.
Yeah.
But this church is full of grandchildren.
Absolutely. That's right.
Who need you to adopt them.
That's right.
To tell them they're the most beautiful child that's ever been born, and the smartest child that's ever been born, because the world beats it out of them.
Totally.
And to have that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've had conversation with our pastors here and our church leaders from various congregations across Middle Tennessee and other places. What's the one thing you want to leave them with?
Be patient and be encouraged.
Yeah.
The one who has called you is faithful. The one who has called you is faithful. And so don't doubt the call, but more importantly, don't doubt the one who issues the call.
Good stuff. He's Ben Anderson, and that's why we wanted him to be a guest on the first time on this new set. And I'm Mike Glenn, Engaged Church Network. Thanks for being with us today.